Hello there, I'm Alyson coming to you from Durban, South Africa. We welcome you to another episode of World of Africa. This week, we focus on the north, where two countries are dealing with a crisis. One, a natural disaster problem, and the other, a ballooning birth rate debacle. Thanks for joining us. The show starts now. Lightning bolts, a strange glow, unusual flashes. Social media users reported odd lights in the sky near the time of Friday's Morocco earthquake, which has taken more than 2,600 lives and injured thousands more. Scientists say that earthquakes can produce various light phenomena in our atmosphere, signaling electric changes beneath the surface. Now that the disaster has cleared its path, the difficult journey begins, assessing the damage and picking up the pieces. Here's a report from Marrakesh.
This is the terrifying moment when disaster struck Morocco. Pandemonium and fear was evident. Tremors are common in North Africa's most northern tip, but not at this scale. Marrakesh was the hardest hit. It bore the brunt of the 6.8 magnitude earthquake. Rescuers had a hard time reaching the villages that border the city, as the roads were inaccessible and the terrain was difficult. Shocked and in disbelief, many Moroccans decided to take shelter on the streets for fear of aftershocks or another earthquake occurring. By daybreak, the level of devastation and loss was evident. The earthquake left thousands of people dead and many hundreds missing or buried under the debris. Villages were wiped out and infrastructure laid in ruins.
I would like to express my sympathy to the dear people of Morocco, hit by a devastating earthquake. I pray for the injured and for those who have lost their lives, so many people, and for their families. I thank the rescuers and all those who are working to alleviate the suffering of the people.
The epicenter of the earthquake was the town of Igil, roughly 70 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh. While seismicity rates are indeed lower in the region, making earthquakes rarer, they are not completely unheard of. Northern Morocco lies close to the boundary between the African plate and the Eurasian plate. This zone of right lateral strike slip becomes transpressional at its eastern end with the development of large thrust faults. To the east of the Strait of Gibraltar is the Alboran Sea. The boundary becomes collisional in type. Most of the seismicity in Morocco is related to movement on that plate boundary, with the greatest seismic hazard in the north of the country close to the boundary. A fault is a fracture or zone or fractures between two blocks or rock. Faults allow the blocks to move relative to each other, causing earthquakes if the movement occurs rapidly. During a quake, the rock on one side of the fault suddenly slips with respect to the other. According to experts, such quakes are generally more dangerous as they carry more energy than when they emerge to the surface. When compared to quakes that occur deeper underneath the surface. Unlike regions which frequently face quakes, Morocco was also not prepared for such a calamity. While a 1960 earthquake which killed thousands did bring about changes to construction rules, most Moroccan buildings, especially in rural areas and older cities, are not built to withstand such strong tremors.
We are living in a crisis situation. We ask that King Mohammed VI intervenes and sends us some help because we are living through a traumatizing situation. The people don't have electricity. They have nothing to eat or drink. No bread. Nothing.
Remote villages in Morocco are among the places most impacted by this earthquake. The earthquake is the country's deadliest since a 2004 tremor in the northern Rift Mountains killed more than 600 people. Since the 2004 earthquake, the government has worked on a sophisticated plan for rapid intervention with a two-tiered system, including both national and provincial response operations. Thousands of people flooded to transfusion centers to donate blood in the aftermath of the quake.
We came here to help those people who suffered from the earthquake. After this disaster, we have to help those people and we have to help each other. The least we could help with is giving our blood to those who need it. This is why we are here today.
Morocco declared 3 days of national mourning. King Mohammed VI ordered the armed forces to mobilize air and land assets, specialized search and rescue teams, and a surgical field hospital. But despite an outpouring of offers to help from around the world, the Moroccan government had not formally asked for assistance, a step required before outside rescue crews could be deployed. However, many nations are sending aid and rescuers to the disaster-hit country. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
African ministers at the United Nations General Assembly have continuously called for expanding the Security Council to include permanent representation for their continent and stressed the vital role of socio-economic development in ensuring peace. Africa's call for reform of the United Nations Security Council, the UNSC, has grown into a compelling argument for decolonizing the composition of the council by adding one or more African permanent members. Despite the African primary concern, African countries are not adequately represented in it. After the inclusion of the African Union into the Group of 20, all eyes are now on the UN and the Group of 7. Will they be as accommodating, or will the quest persist? Let's find out in this next report.
The Group of 20 top world economies welcomed African Union as a new member at their annual summit in New Delhi. A powerful acknowledgement of Africa as its more than 50 countries seek a more important role on the global stage. With this, the African Union became the second regional bloc to be a permanent member after the European Union. This also added momentum to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's drive to give a greater voice to the global south. The Indian Prime Minister welcomed the current AU chair, Comoros President Azali Assoumani, with a hug and said he was elated.
We are now moving into an era where no decisions can be taken without the participation of the African continent. And we're going to use this significant development to advocate for more reforms. The United Nations Security Council, the global multilateral financial institutions remain untransformed, and we will be using this step as a step in the right direction to increase our advocacy for the reform of those institutions.
This decision, the African Union in the G20 is a major step for the G20, for Africa, but it's not the last step. I have the impression that in the future it will be needed to work to make the world fairer, and it means more inclusive.
The continent, whose young population of 1.3 billion is set to double by 2050 and make up a quarter of the planet's people, is aiming higher.
Africa belongs to the table in every room where global challenges are being discussed, and in every institution where discussions are taking place. That's why I announced in September at the United Nations General Assembly that the United States fully supports reforming the UN Security Council to include permanent representation for Africa.
Last year, the US hosted African leaders for a summit. The meet culminated with pledges by Western nations to push for the continent's recognition in global fora. The AU's 55 member states have pressed for meaningful roles in global bodies, including the United Nations Security Council. Historically, African countries have used their representational strength as the largest single voting bloc to resist efforts to weaken, undermine or dilute the UN. They want reforms to a global financial system, including the World Bank and other entities that force African nations to pay more than others to borrow money, deepening their debt.
Look at what is happening in African countries and other developing countries. Some credit rating agencies go about rating countries without consulting with them first. The ratings translate to high borrowing costs for these countries, which are among the poorest countries. So we hope to readdress and mitigate the situation and help all nations make gradual progress. Because after all, Africa also wants to share development dividends.
The continent has been historically sidelined in global dialogue and decision-making. While the G7 summit prides itself on its efforts to address global challenges, including climate change, economic equality, global health crisis and security threats, the grouping has been increasingly criticized for excluding Africa from these important discussions.
Something new has turned up in front of us. Since the BRICS was established, people have begun to pin their hopes on the new organization and what it is capable of. That is because people look forward to seeing reforms and believe that they would become stronger within this framework. But in my opinion, we are witnessing the course of history advancing. And that's also why I think the trend is unstoppable and will push ahead constantly.
Critics have denounced Western attitudes towards Africa. They say the continent can't just continue to be a source of raw materials for the rest of the world. African governments are continuously being reminded by their citizens not to lose their focus on creating a fairer global system, even while diversifying their partnerships. Many have advocated for clearly defined strategies of external engagement, particularly in an environment of intensifying global rivalries. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Gabon junta is planning a 2-year transition period before holding elections. That was announced by the newly appointed Prime Minister of the latest African nation to undergo a coup. But Gabon's putsch is quite different from a series of coups in Africa's Sahel region, highlighting the striking variation of coup efforts from region to region, with factors like history, foreign intervention, economics and politicization of the military all playing a role. Critics and some Gabonese say 2 years is a long time. However, will the junta survive? Here's a report.
Life in Gabon is slowly returning to normal after a coup to oust longtime ruler Ali Bongo. Ever since he was sworn in as the president, Brice Oligui Nguema ordered shops to reopen and told government workers to return to their jobs. But problems have started to surface. Right in the center of Libreville, residents have access to water via a public fountain, which is only open a few hours a week, often in the middle of the night. The rest of the time, residents who can't go to other neighborhoods or buy mineral water have to draw untreated water from a well dug in the ground.
There's no reason why a country like Gabon, where there's water, should be short of water at the taps. There's a real problem. Gabon's water and energy company doesn't, how should I put it, really take care of the concerns to heart.
Most of the Gabonese seem to welcome the regime change, but the economic situation remains a concern in a country where a third of the population lives below the poverty line.
Priorities are first. I used to buy a chicken leg for 1.3 euros. Now it's 2.5 euros a kilo. I have 8 children, 12 grandsons. How am I going to live? Lower prices. We can't afford food.
Raymond Ndong Sima, a prominent opponent to ousted President Ali Bongo Ondimba, was appointed interim prime minister following the coup. The 68-year-old Paris-educated economist served as prime minister under Mbongo from 2012 to 2014, before becoming a critic and competing against him in the 2016 and 2023 presidential campaigns. In his first address to the nation, the Prime Minister did indicate the transition period to civilian rule. He says a 2-year transition before the free elections promised by Gabon's new military rulers is a reasonable objective. That period could end up being slightly longer or shorter.
The process we have to carry out to reach this election is an inclusive one. Inclusive means that discussions and consultations would involve many people. So there will be a lot of back and forth, synthesis, restitutions and validations of the results we get halfway through. As a result, I believe that this can be completed within 24 months.
Bongo Ondimba.
The junta says the ousted President Ali Bongo Ondimba, who has been under house arrest since he was deposed, is now free. This as the military leaders met local and regional authorities promising a better life.
The Committee for the Transition and Restoration of Institutions, CTRI, reaffirms that given his state of health, the former President of the Republic, Ali Bongo Ondimba, has freedom of movement.
Ali Bongo Ondimba.
It is not clear the state of the ousted president, who had suffered a stroke in late 2018 that kept him away from his duties for months. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Egypt's economy has come under severe pressure over the past year, with the Egyptian pound tumbling, foreign currency drying up, and inflation soaring. Now the country has to deal with another problem. A surging population is leaving the country of more than 105 million people with an increasingly unaffordable burden. Here's a report from Cairo.
The population counter at the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics in Cairo revealed that Egypt's population has surpassed 105 million residents. The country's population has increased by 25 million people in the past 10 years, despite efforts by the government to curb population growth. At the opening of the Global Congress on Population, Health and Development in Cairo, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that the country needs to maintain annual population growth of 400,000 people over the next 20 years.
You need 400,000 birds per year because we don't just need to reduce the birds to 2.1 or 1.8 or even 1.5. No, we need to reduce more in order to compensate the failure of the state in dealing with the population's increase in the last 70 years. We need to reach 400,000 birds per year within 20 years.
El-Sisi stressed that while having children is a freedom, it must be regulated to avoid a national disaster. The president pointed out to China as an example of controlling population growth through its one-child policy.
I do not agree with the complete freedom of birds for people who potentially do not know the extent of the challenge. In the end, it is the entire society and the Egyptian state that will pay the price. The Chinese started that in 1968, and in 2017 they gave again the freedom for more than one child.
Since 2000, Egypt's population increased by 40 million to 105 million. In early February, the head of Egypt's National Population Council warned that the country's population will reach 142 to 157 million people by 2050. Meanwhile, as the country deals with population burst, annual inflation rate hit a new record high in August. The cash-strapped country continues to battle price hikes and a depreciating currency. The annual inflation rate reached 39.7% in August, up from 38.2% recorded in July. According to data released by the state-run Central Agency for Mobilization and Statistics. The figures showed that food prices, the main drivers of inflation, rose by over 70% in August compared to the same month last year. Grains, meat, poultry, fish and fruit were among the products with the biggest price spikes. The surge is compounded by economic pressures, shortage of foreign currency and successive devaluation of the local currency. The Egyptian pound lost more than 50% of its value against the dollar since the Russian war on Ukraine broke out in February 2022. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And finally, a mobile phone app is helping farmers increase crop yields in Kenya. Hello Tractor links farmers with tractor owners, resulting in more efficiently plowed fields and farmers not forced to rely on manual labor. The World Food Programme says it hopes the app will help ease food insecurity in the country.
Tractor owner Peter Mungai has just received a message from a farmer who needs a field ploughing. The request has arrived through an app called Hello Tractor. Mungai, who owns 4 tractors, points out the location to one of his drivers who is quickly on his way to the farm.
We are making money double the profit we used to get before we were introduced to Hello Tractor.
Approximately 60% of the African population depends on agriculture to make a living. However, crop production lags behind the rest of the world. One of the main reasons for this is because most of the work is done manually. Now, Hello Tractor is playing a major role in the mechanism of farming, reducing the manual labor required on the farms. The app connects farmers with tractor owners who can plow their farms for a fee. It means that small-scale farmers don't actually need to buy a tractor.
The first advantage is that it is fast, which means you can do it before the rain. When you call them, the work is done quickly, enabling you to plant the crops on time. And the second one has to do with the yield, because when you plant on time, the produce increases compared to before, when you delayed it.
Well, Hello Tractor was started in 2014 in Nigeria and is now available in 18 countries across Africa and Asia. The Kenya World Food Programme says that the success and acceptance of technology like Hello Tractor, they are a big positive for farming in Kenya.
As more and more farmers embrace technology, the cost of food production will actually go lower. The amount of food produced should increase, and as we also embrace good practices in post-harvest management of food commodities, the challenge of food insecurity in Kenya could actually be addressed.
Initiators of the project say it's a win-win situation for both tractor owners and the farmers. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It's a wrap on this week's episode of World of Africa. Thank you for your time and thanks for watching. Share your feedback with us, and if you have a story idea that you want told on the show, then get in touch with us on our social media platforms. We'd love hearing from you. I'm Alyson Lagrange, and from the entire WION team in India and here in South Africa, goodbye and see you next time.